Greetings, ladies and gents, and welcome to this latest episode of Tales from Outer Space, taken from the subreddit HFY. The links to all the stories will be down below, and as always, I hope that you enjoy. And if you do, please consider subscribing. Story number 1, The Old Elvish War, written by daeomec. Cole, a poor PhD student, leaned back in his chair. He hadn't slept for 72 hours. The words on his laptop blurred, and his typing switched between German and English, forcing him to backspace and rewrite each sentence. Cole rubbed his eyes. Damn, he had 4 days left before the deadline, but that wasn't nearly enough time. There never was. He made himself look at the old machine that was the subject of his report. Built 1,000 years ago, it was a perfect blend of alchemy, mechanical gears, and runes. The letters were in Old Germanic, but each one had an Elvish pictograph beside it. The machine, known as the Rune Singer, had been used during the great human-Elvish wars to communicate between the different species. It also made him despair ever picking up a period of history of expertise. Frack history, he said slowly. Cole edged closer to the Rune Singer and copied the sweeping symbols inscribed around the edges. Frack magic and frick elves. Not that he'd get the chance. After their defeat, the elves fled the earthen realms, whatever that meant. Most historians claimed that it was a dressed-up term for genocide, while others theorized that the elves had burrowed underground, or flown to outer space, or whatever. Either way, the elves were gone, and the only remnants were their technology, historical, first-hand accounts, and the occasional person who claimed to be 125th Elvish. At least, that was what Cole had thought before the Runeslinger fled to life. The magical overlay shimmered, gears cranking and popping as the machine brute-forced its way through 10 centuries of disuse. Since Cole had spent the last 2 weeks researching and practically worshipping the Runesinger, he was able to make out the glowing glyphs that swirled in the air. Request meeting, renegotiate terms of surrender. Oh, hell. Once his incoherent babbling became understandable, Cole managed to explain what had happened to his department head, who promptly abandoned everything else on her schedule to send a frantic message to her colleagues. They soon discovered that their borrowed machine wasn't unique. All the Rune Slingers in Europe had displayed the same message, as did the Rune Slinger equivalents in India, China, and the Incan states, Ethiopia, and across the world. The space theory cannot be correct, no? Asked Cole, wringing his hands. Do you think the elves have hidden for all this time? I doubt it, Dr. Green furrowed. It could be someone who found the magical frequency of the machines, someone who wants to play a sick joke. The frequency for every single one. He didn't bother to hide his skepticism. The accumulated stress, caffeine, and excitement made manners sit at the bottom of his priority list. Dr. Green didn't respond, too busy checking her email. I got a message from... She stopped and stared. From who? The League of Nations, she mumbled, sinking slowly into her chair. Well, there goes my theory of it all being a bad joke. The League was in what awkward transition period from utter joke of an organization to competent and respected world government. It was leaning more towards the latter, but 10 years ago it had been more respected, and 20 years ago it had been mostly ignored. So was the story of politics. As a Secretary-General in the last year of her term, Minixi Lee expected to spend the rest of her time bolstering the League's responsibilities and power. She had not expected to deal with elves, like all the other world leaders, except for the president of East Russia, who was a crackpot conspiracy theorist. She'd gone quickly through the stages of, is this a joke, to complete shock to, what the hell should we do? Renegotiation of terms, she said aloud. What in God's name were the terms? Her aide poked up from behind the laptop. Well, ma'am, considering the Elven-human warring period spanning a century and all the continents, there's about 50 different peace treaties, each unique to the civilization that negotiated it. Short version, please. Looking a little disappointed, the aide continued. There's 2 common conditions for each treaty, though. the elves' complete retreat from the human realm, and a strict promise to never intervene in our affairs and vice versa. And that's what they want to renegotiate, said Meenakshi, frowning, assuming that the messages are actually from owls, which seems more and more likely. It's the only thing that makes sense. I can forward the memo with the details. Please do. Meenakshi glanced down at her own screen. Actually, does that memo have information on the start of the Elven-human wars? I've been looking for an answer, but I can't find a single good explanation. That's because there isn't one, ma'am. It's one of the most contested facts in history. Oddly enough, not a single civilization has concrete reason or records about the start, though there are plenty of documentation about the middle bits. Would you like me to send to you the leading theories on that? Absolutely. If humans were about to renegotiate a millennium-old treaties with a species that they hadn't seen in just as long, with a species that probably wanted to come back to Earth from who knows where, humanity was going to need to be prepared. After 2 days of frantic collaboration, Human had more or less agreed to respond with the same message at the same time. The exception was the president of East Russia, but a partial coup had fixed that mess. No sane person wanted their country to be known for restarting the interspecies war. Which is how Carl found himself sitting in front of a rune slinger as his department head counted down his seconds. Normally his advisor would be doing this, but his advisor was in China for something unrelated, leaving Carl the only one who could operate the machine. He'd typed in the message already, and now they were just waiting until the agreed time. Carl reread the sentence for a third time, making sure that he'd spelled it correctly. The finest linguistics of Elven had been composed it, but despite its flowery and proper language, the message basically translates to, "New phone? Who dis?" He chuckled to himself, caused Dr. Green to give him a strange look. All right, maybe that was a little oversimplified. In the message were also polite inquiries of where, when, and why. 2 seconds, Cole. He nodded with a deep breath and put his finger on the glowing enter button. Thankfully, he didn't need to be a mage to operate this kind of rune slinger, or else they'd be, what was the phrase? Up Crap Creek without a boat? Well, something like that. Magical talent was incredibly rare, and the percentage of the population who could use it dropped every year. Now, Cole tapped on the key, and the rune slinger hummed with the light and magic as it transmitted the message to who knows where. All across the world, its cousins were doing the same. The response was prompt. Just an hour later, every single machine lit up like before, each with an identical message. According to the slightly longer response, the elves believed that not enough time had passed for the 2 species to communicate again. They requested a meeting with only 5 representatives, specifying that just 2 could be mages, at one of 3 locations: Stonehenge in the United Kingdom, Rajam al-Hiri in the Egyptian Empire, or the Casagrande ruins in Mexico. The meeting would preferably happen in the next full moon, which was in a week. There was a slight bit of confusion as the linguists argued over whether it meant 5 people at each of the 3 places or 5 people at one, resulting in an improbably long email chain. The argument ended when someone pointed out that the particular rune meant or and not and, causing the sheepish round of apologies and recanting of insults. The ending of that argument started a whole new one. Which place should be picked? A few countries were miffed at the elves choosing the meeting grounds to begin with, claiming that the humans should demand the location since they'd won the war. Others thought that this whole mess was a bad idea, and that everyone should pretend that it didn't happen. The UQ and the Egyptian Empire and the Mexico were all varying levels of apprehensive and pleased at being chosen. In the end, the world agreed that the United Kingdom deserved the honor. Since it was an island, if anything went wrong, the mess should be easier to contain. The UQ wasn't as happy about its particular logic, but at least they got bragging rights. So, a week later, humanity wished that they were watching with bated breath, since the truth was that the broadcast of the meeting would be delayed, something which irked a lot of people who were eager to see elves. But their irritation was small price to pay to ensure that the elves wouldn't be offended by having their faces broadcast on every television screen and plastered across the internet. Instead, 5 hand-picked individuals stood in front of Stonehenge, keenly waiting what they thought were about to make history. Asha watched as a dome of green light enveloped the famous circle of rocks. She didn't need her magometer to know that this insane amount of magic was being used to spew a spell. The hair on her arm stood up as her skin prickled, almost like someone was dunking her in ice water. Asha checked the official reading with the magometer anyway. As expected, it ranged in the gigamana, enough to power the entirety of New York for a year. The only other mage in Incan named Kanyu exchanged looks with her. Asha could see the bracelets glowing as they absorbed the excess mana, and she hid a smile. While the elf's spell was extraordinarily wasteful, it seemed blasé to store such extra magic now. Her 3 colleagues felt nothing, of course, though the more sensitive ones may have noticed a bit of pressure. The soldier shifted in place, the academic stared wide-eyed, and the diplomat from the League simply checked her watch. Asha didn't blame her. The spell was taking an awful long time. "How much longer?" mumbled the diplomat. Sarah Warner of the Northern America, if Asha's memory was correct. "My guess is a couple minutes," she answered. The intensity of the magic was petering out. It was now only kilomena, but as Asha was overestimated the spell's length, in just 30 seconds the dome blinked out, leaving 5 individuals standing in the center. All boredom that she had with the slight show disappeared, and intense excitement took its place. Elves. They looked like the stories had said, long, tapered ears that stretched to the tip of their skull, skin ranging from silver green to deep blue, and large doe-like eyes. Their metallic hair fell to their waist, coiled in braids, and their cheekbones stuck out in a rigid arc. And despite the general oddness of their appearance, the elves were strangely beautiful. The middle one, tall and completely pale, stepped forward. "Thank you for agreeing to meet with us," he said in a fluent Syrian-accented Arabic. Asha blinked. How in the world? It took a second for her to remember the briefing they'd had. Historical reports claimed that the elves had been an instant translating spell. Curious, she switched her train of thought to Arabic to English, and mid-sentence the elf's speech changed from Arabic to the posh BBC-style English. "Does our great honor that our people may speak face-to-face again," the elf continued with the niceties, saying the whole bunch of nothing that translated into, "Nice to meet you, and please don't shoot us." After that he finished, Sarah began her own version of the same speech. They all had heard her practice it a dozen times, so none of her fellow humans were really paying attention. Kunya was observing the faint shimmering around the stone pillars, that kind that signified a ward or shield. That interested her too. They'd fixed the floor decades ago, and their own Magitech shields were completely clear. Interesting. Asha glanced at the other colleagues. Takeshi, the soldier, was scanning the 5 elves and the surroundings, hands clasped around his gun. And then Dr. Ease was still staring wide-eyed in disbelief. She hefted her gaze to the elves, and to her amusement, the other 4 weren't very focused on the speech either. One had her eyes closed in a look of concentration that Asha associated with sensing magic. The other 3 were staring at the floodlights around the rocks and the asphalt roads that sandwiched Stonehenge. Besides the cars that Asha's group had come in on, the roads were empty. The British government had blocked them off, of course. It had been the height of stupidity to let any random person stroll into the negotiations. "Perhaps you'd like to move the meeting to somewhere nicer?" asked Sarah once she'd finished with her speech, patented diplomatic smile number 3 in place. "It's a bit chilly, and we can accommodate you." "Thank you, but we'd prefer to speak here," said the lead elf. What was the name that he'd said? Arenless? A bit miffed at being interrupted, Sarah downgraded her expression to diplomat smile number 4. "All right, that's fine. They prepared for this as well. Shall we start with the introductions?" Quickly, all 10 people gave their names and roles. Ireneless was an elven lord and the leader of the delegation, while the other 4 were mages. Actually, Ireneless was a mage too. Sarah's smile dropped down to number 5 after hearing this. It seemed lacking in good faith for the elves to make requests and not follow them. Unlike humans, all elves were apparently magical, but still, It was the principle of the matter. So I hope that you're ready to give us some answers, Sarah said. Her tone was much terser than before. If you're willing to give them in return, the elf smiled, and Asher noticed that his canines were longer than the average human's. What made you contact us after all this time? Arenlis was quiet for a moment. After all this time? Ah, yes, as we mentioned in our message, we believe that our species are ready to engage and report once more, now that enough time has passed since the war. Asher raised an eyebrow at this, and both Kanya and Takashi seemed unconvinced. Sarah didn't hide her disbelief either, but she didn't seem willing to press it. Now a question of her own. Which ruler do you speak for? Asked Aurelius. Despite the brisk night wind, he stood tall and unaffected. All of them, Sarah said, just as tall, though her fingers were rather pale from the cold. All of them? For the first time he seemed taken aback. Yes, I have full authority invested in me by the League of Nations. Low murmuring commenced between the other elves, but Asher couldn't understand a single word. Dr. Ease was listening, however, and she had a slight frown. And who do you speak for? Sarah asked. Everyone? A moment of hesitation. Only the Winter Court, said the elf. Lord Aurelius, who is your current ruler? Asked Dr. Ease, breaking the instructions to let the diplomat speak first. Sarah shot her a look which she ignored. Aurelius' second silence was a little longer. Quinn Larail. Dr. Ease's frown grew, but before she could respond, Sarah cut back in. Anyway, let's get down to business, shall we? What was your purpose in contacting us? To reopen diplomatic relations, to engage in trade, of course. Sarah nodded. And to return to this land? She asked sweetly. That can be discussed in time, Lady Sarah Warner. Aurelius tilted his head, and his silver earrings jangled. Though her teeth lacked the same long canines, her smile was somehow just as intimidating as the elves. I'm sure it can be. While Alaris and Sarah continued to rephrase the same conversation in careful speech, the others were given nothing to do besides stand around awkwardly. They weren't a neat little semicircle now, but rather in clumps. The four non-diplomatic elves were bunched in the middle of Stonehenge, staves in hand, while the counterpart humans were all on the other sides. Do you think that we should talk to them? Asked Asher. I know that they let Sarah handle it at first, but it's not at first anymore, is it? Kunya shrugged, fiddling with his bracelets. Maybe, but they do not seem willing to approach. His English, like Takashi's, was only the lightest of accents. It's for the best, mumbled Takeshi. He was standing the closest to Sarah, and he hadn't relaxed even a little. Well, it was his job to be the muscle. Well, one of them is approaching now, Dr. E said mildly. They all looked to Stonehenge to see one of the elves who at the border of the stones. He glanced nervously at them and placed a hand on the pillar. The other hand was still carved wooden staff. Takeshi tensed, eyeing the elf with distrust. Asha didn't feel any ambient magic, so she simply shrugged and stepped forward. Hello, she said, deciding that someone better act friendly. I don't think I caught your name the first time. The elf blinked. I am Neterin, he said, the voice surprisingly low. You are one of the human mages, Asha. His eyes looked her up and down, and she felt surprisingly self-conscious despite the very practical pantsuit. Maybe it was because he remembered her name while she hadn't. Yes, that's me. Neterin nodded. If I may ask, what are those contraptions on the black road over there? She stared at him for a second. You mean cars? He waited patiently for her to respond. Asher glanced back at the other three, silently begging for help as she fumbled on how to describe them. They're moving vehicles like a carriage. If you wish not to reveal your secrets, you'll not take offense, he assured, clearly skeptical. It was only that we could not sense any magic from them, and we were uncertain to the purpose. She's serious. Dr. E stepped in and put her out of her misery. They really are like carriages that move without horses or magic, she said. We travelled in them. Without magic as well. Neterin's ears rose in a gesture that seemed in surprise. Interesting. What is their fuel? Does it matter? Takeshi said sharply. The elf flinched, keeping his hand on the stone. Dr. E's grimaced but not protest her colleague's tone. I suppose not, admitted Nutteren. Would you mind me asking more questions? Depends, Takashi frowned. But we'll do our best to answer, if we can, added Asher, raising her eyebrows at the soldier. Nutteren nodded again, slower. What is the metal device that you have there, said Takashi. Takashi's frown deepened. A gun. Pardon? This time the three of them exchanged looks of varying confusion. A projectile weapon, said Takashi. Nutteren edged closer to the rock, eyes firmly on the gun. There is no magic in it. Not right now, agreed Takashi. There is no magic in those lights either. Asha blinked. Of course there wasn't. Magitech was complicated and expensive, used mainly for the most cutting-edge machinery. It was so much cheaper and easier to use regular tech for simple things like lighting an area. She would know magic tech was her field of study. Kunya, who'd still been staring at the shimmer by the rocks of Stonehenge, spoke up. You have very powerful shields. There is much mana being pumped through them. It looks like an interlocking structure, but I'm not sure about the energy source. What are you using for it? Thank you. The elf stepped back. This has been an enlightening conversation. Nutteren hurried back to the group and began murmuring again in Elvish. The second we ask any questions, muttered Kunya. Well, yours were really specific and just a little suspicious. Asha shook her head. What, like asking about the structure of the wards in any case of trouble? Despite his mock innocence, his smile broke through. She hadn't known it could happen, but Takashi's frown deepened even further. Careful what you say. Speaking of concern, did anyone notice how weird his questions were? Asked Asha. It seems like he had no idea what a car or a gun were. Maybe his translating spell wasn't working. More likely their methods for transportation and war are different, said Dr. Ease with a thoughtful, half-focused expression. From the way she glanced between the elves and the two diplomats, it was obvious that she was following three conversations at once. Or maybe they're not as advanced as us, Takeshi said. After 1,000 years, Asha raised both eyebrows. According to those reports that we were force-fed, the elves were in a better position than we were before the war. You would be surprised at how different technology advances in one civilization to the next, said Kunya darkly. Internal conflict, stagnation, different priorities. There is 100 reasons why their civilization might lack what we think is common knowledge. There was an awkward pause as the conversation at that. No one knowing what to say to Kunya's friendly reminder until Dr. Ease broke it, not by continuing their conversation, but interrupting Sarah's. Lord Arillis, you brought up the war again. Why did it start exactly? Do you know? Our own records are incomplete. Sarah's expression was furious and the elf stiffened. Still, he answered her. It is incomplete in our own archives, he said slowly, considering how long it has been. I doubt that, said Dr. Ease, calmer than the cloudless night sky above. You told me that your current ruler is Queen Lerael. We have records of her being the heiress to the Winter Throne. Records dating back 1,000 years. Now, unless there's been a drastic change in lifespan, we know that owls live as long as 400 years. Her father was almost 350 years old when the war ended. If she's still ruling, that means something is off. Couldn't it be a ruler of the same name? Asked Asha, unable to help herself. Dr. E shook her head. At times like this, it was easy to see why the hunched, mousy professor of Elvish had been chosen for this team. Elves consider it taboo to share a name, especially with the dead. It's right up there with direct lies. She gave the elf a look. Unless that has changed. Lord Arenlis closed his eyes. It is not. Sir Queen Lerael has alive during the war and still rules, she pressed. Yes, he said finally, which means that you probably do know how the war started. He didn't respond, and the other elves shifted in place, and Asha could feel the low hum of magic gather in their staves. She glanced at Kunya, who shook his bracelets, cancelling the cloaking effect on their own Magitech shield. The shimmering sprung up around them, and the elves drew back slightly. Kunya had military training, but Asha was the scientist mage. Nervously, she ran through a few combat spells she knew, hoping that it wouldn't come to fighting. Dr. Ease, I think that's enough, Sarah stated. You want to renegotiate the terms of surrender for a war we don't remember. It only seems fair that we know the cause. Dr. Ease stepped forward. Then Takashi moved to cover her. Do you know why? One of the other elves opened her mouth to protest, but Lord Arinless cut her off and raised a hand. Yes. Well, what is it then? It was for land, he said, smiling, as wars usually are. Was it really? You fought a simultaneous war on 7 continents for land? Asher frowned. Wasn't that the reason? The briefing had suggested that the elves wanted to return to this land, so it made sense that the land had caused the war in the first place. Why was Dr. E so certain that that wasn't the case? This has gotten out of hand, snapped Sarah. Lord Arinless, I apologize for my colleague's behavior. She glanced at her to watch again. I suggest that we pause and take a break. Perhaps you'd like to move to another place, somewhere sheltered, where we can offer you refreshments. This is fine. Lord Arinless, without another word, turned and joined his fellow elves inside the ring of Stonehenge. The Secretary-General knocked over a coffee in haste to hear the first update of the elf-human delegation. All the countries had squabbled over who'd be in on it, but they'd finally agreed on a batch that made no one happy. "Ma'am, what's the report?" said her aide, craning his neck to see the screen. He winced at the look she gave him, but he didn't take back these questions. "Sarah Warner says that things are going oddly," she frowned. "There is apparently some inconsistencies with the elf story. They also seem completely ignorant of modern human society. At the very least, she can throw out one of the main concerns. It looks like the elves haven't been observing us like we'd feared. If anything, they are as in the dark as we are." "That's strange," he said. "I agree. I'll send you the report, make the changes I've noticed, summarize the rest, and send it to the person I've mentioned." She clasped her hands behind her back and stared mournfully at her coffee. "Oh, and could you get someone to get me another cup?" Of course, her aide jumped straight to work. Thank the gods for his enthusiasm. He was always over the moon to get things done. As he left Meenakshi sighed and began reviewing the recordings of the meeting. A team was watching the live feed and they'd compiled the recording in the top 10 highlights. Still, the worst part of the elves' business was how helpless she felt. Though she could see everything going on, she wasn't the one that could do much. The elves had been very clear on wanting to meet with only 5 humans. In the end, it was up to them. They restarted the dialogue, starting with the mild and sleek-inducing topic of governmental structure. That backfired. Lord Arinless seemed scandalized by, of all things, democracy. "You do what to your leaders?" "Elect them," said Sarah slowly. "Your masses choose them." "Yes, mostly." The elf's neon green eyes narrowed. "Whatever happened to all your kings and queens?" "Various things," Dr. E said, shrugging. "United Kingdom still has one, though she's only ceremonial. Most were either forced or abdicate, or had their monarchies dissolved, or were deposed. Generally speaking, everyone is equal under the eyes of the law." "Everyone?" said the scarred elf in the back. "Curious. Regardless of birth." Lord Arinless turned slowly, pinning the speaker with a glare that caused her to bow back and away. "Everyone," Sarah confirmed. She pursed her lips, displeased. "Don't you? We have a system of nobility, as it should be." The second has said those words. The elf lord seemed to regret it, especially after all the humans were rankled by his pronouncement. "Of course, as humans you have a free leave to organize yourselves as you wish," he added. "Thank you for your generosity," muttered Kunya. Asher hid a yawn, coming out front of the full moon, all dramatic and everything, but at 2 in the morning and freezing cold. "So, are we going to address the elephants in the room?" said Dr. Urza, immediately ending everyone's drowsiness. "What parts of the treaty do you want to change? Where did you all go, and why did the war start? And how long has it been since the war ended, for you?" "You're being very forward," said Arinless, frowned. "Lady Warner, does she have the authority to speak as you do?" "She does," said Sarah, "and I don't have any noble titles, thank you." She didn't even seem very happy that Dr. Urza's insistence to get the truth immediately, but she didn't say anything to stop her. "With all due respect, are you going to answer my questions? You've been avoiding them." There were 10 seconds of silence as Lord Arinless closed his eyes again, deliberating. He opened them and ducked his head. "Fine, I shall answer them in full. First, we wish to renegotiate the clause of neutrality." Asher had scratched her chin. So Dr. Urza had been right about the different reasons. In what way and why? Asked Sarah. In our treaties with humanity, we agreed to leave this realm, and neither the humans nor elves would attempt to intervene in each other's internal affairs. He took in a deep, steadying breath, and Asha could feel the magic like static stripped over her. We wish for you to end that neutrality because we seek your help. The Winter Court is under attack, and we are desperate for assistance. This time the humans were the ones struck dumb. My lord, must we really grovel at there? Protested an elf with pale green eyes and a braided crown of gold hair. Indeed we must. Lord Arinless kept a gaze on the human delegation, not even blinking. I see, said Sarah, recovering quickly, though her eyes were still wide. You mentioned that you left this realm. What does that mean? We went to another world, he said shortly. It is a process that requires an intense amount of magic, something we only did out of desperation. Because of your kind, said his deepening frown. Like another dimension? Asha asked. Lord Arinless tilted his head, listening to something for a moment. Indeed, that is the word. And now you're asking for our help, said Kunya, raising an eyebrow. Yes, and I have noticed that you did not say if you would help, he said, teeth gritted. We don't have the authority to commit to a war. Sarah was toying with her watch, and thought that put the casual front, she seemed more anxious by the minute. Especially when we don't know anything about the first one. Dr. Urza leaned forward like a wolf in pursuit of prey. Shall we discuss the present moment instead? Said Lord Arinless, stepping back. Like the other elves, he hadn't walked past the ring of Stonehenge, and now he was drawing closer to the center. What had been a light curiosity, a fact shared around the cocktails, did you know what the historians aren't sure why we've ever fought the elves, became a pressing questions. The elves were back, they wanted help, and the humans had no idea about any of it. I think we won't discuss that right now, Sarah said softly. Like Kunya said, you're asking for our help. I think it is best that we're completely honest with each other. Another elf, the same one who'd protested earlier, moved forward to the edge of Stonehenge. You want to know why? He spat. In the bright fluorescent light, his skin seemed to shine. Asha's major meter began to beep as the elf collected magic, and Kunya raised the shields higher. In response, Takashi raised his gun. Olessus, don't! Lord Arinless began. No, they asked. I will answer. Olessus's hands shook. We want to war because you killed our queen. You killed her and defiled her and stripped her skin, and then you cut off her head and paraded her around the kingdom, and we decided to kill you all for it. The humans were struck dumb for a second. What could someone say to that? What could someone say to a person who accused them of such a heinous crime, who had anger and rage about war that no human remembered? To a person who admitted to attempting genocide and now wanted their help. Asha didn't know, neither did Kunya or Sarah, or even Dr. Urza. Takashi was one who spoke. How long has it been since the war? He said, quiet. 100 years. Olessus's voice cracked, the green magic gathering in his empty hand. I fought in it. I saw what you did to her. And none of you remember. None of you remember or even know. One of the other elves grabbed his hand. The magic dissipated. They pulled him away from the edge of the circle, speaking to him in low, soft terms. How is that possible? Murmured Sarah. How could time pass so differently? Like time dilation, said Asha, her mind spinning. Time passing differently from two different observers. I remember reading about a spell that... A sudden thought came to her. Was this intentional? Lord Arinless was still watching his fellow elves. It took him a few moments to answer, and when he spoke, his polished tone sounded defeated. Not like this. We'd hoped for the opposite, smaller effect. We wanted more time to recover before we launched our counterattack. Ideally, 100 years would pass for us, and only 10 would have passed for you. His laugh was bitter. Instead, for each decade we experienced 100 years passed in your realm. Was it a miscast? Asked Asha. No. Sabotage, a traitor. The wood of his staff creaked under his grip. A half-elf named Merlin disrupted the spell as we finished it. We weren't sure what he'd done, but now we know. Merlin, the greatest mage in history whose work still made the foundation of magic studies. Everyone knew he'd died fighting the elves, and he'd been a half-elf. Why do you want our help? Sarah said finally, and why should we help you? Because the Lady of the Lake has overthrown 3 of the 4 courts. He looked away. Only winter is left, and if she defeats us, then she'll come for you. The conference room in Geneva was packed with delegates from all the nations. Monarch Li had a major headache as people began shouting to be heard. Someone else was futilely yelling, "Decorum," with no effect. "This is ridiculous," shouted the delegate from East Russia. "How do we know this is not a trap? Maybe they are lying to us. It could all be lies." "It seems like an awfully complicated lie for no good reason," the Northern American delegate drawled. "What in the world could they gain from it?" "They want our help, clearly, but what better way to get it than a sob-story," said the representative from the Incan states. "A sob-story where they admit to trying to kill all humans," the Northern American scoffed. "Besides, you read the briefing. Elves can't directly lie." "Directly? And how do we know if this is true or not? That is from 1,000 years ago. Even if it's true, they can still bend the truth. We can ask for more evidence. We don't have to commit now." "I think you're forgetting a point that the honorable delegate from North America brought up. They admitted to attempted genocide. Why should we help them?" "That was 1,000 years ago. None of us even remember it. No one alive does. We didn't even know they even tried until they told us. Besides, if we don't help the rebels, then we'll end up going to war anyway, and not on our terms." "Oh, and where have we ever heard that argument before?" That started another round of arguments with 12 people all trying to get a word in. The Secretary General rubbed her forehead. This was going to be a long day. While the League of Nations was arguing about the future of human-elven relations, Dr. Urza was sitting in a smaller office room with an elf who'd been left behind as a totally not a hostage. It had taken some begging and pleading on Dr. Urza's part, but she'd finally gotten a few hours to interview him. Along with her recorder, Dr. Urza was accompanied by 4 guards and a grumpy-looking diplomat. The latter was there solely to ensure that she didn't traumatize their new elf friend. "So, Neterin, how old are you?" she asked. "I'm a century and a quarter." His eyes darted around the empty room, lingering at the cheap plastic cloak on the wall. Dr. Urza's smile faded. "You didn't fight in the war?" No, I was a child during the end of it." "Wonderful." Of course the elves had left a person who knew very little about the event that she was so desperate to learn about. Dr. Urza crossed the questions about battles, historical figures, and miscellaneous details. She cleared her throat and moved on to the next set of questions about Elven society. "So you're a mage. Are all elves mages?" He shook his head. "Most use magic, but only the most powerful get actual training." Neterin paused. "May I ask questions of my own, Dr. Ezen?" "Eza," she corrected, "and certainly. Often a researcher could learn a great deal about society from the questions they asked." "What is that device you have there?" He pointed at a camera mounted on the back. "It's a camera. It records images and sounds to be played back. Here, let me show you." She ignored the grumpy mutters from the diplomat and showed Neterin her phone, playing the video of a cat getting stuck in a box. He laughed softly at the cat's antics, but his eyes were large with wonder. The second he realized how close he was to her, Neterin jerked back. "Is it like a scrying bowl?" he asked, trying to pretend that he hadn't almost fallen out of his chair. "No, this has already happened, and I play it as many times as I want." To prove a point, she played it again. He gasped and leaned forward, peering at the screen. "Is this a rare device? I don't sense any magic from it." "Most people have one. This one is called a cell phone, by the way, and that's because it doesn't use magic. It just uses electricity." Neterin shook his head slowly. "A tiny scrying box of lightning. Incredible." In a winter dialect of Elvish, she added softly, "No wonder they won." To everyone else in the room, it was unintelligible, but to Dr. Eza, knew all 4 kinds of Elvish and 5 additional dialects. Part of her itched to tell him all about the other things the cell phone could do, but she held her tongue. She was here to learn about the elves and not vice versa. So you have control over the translation spell? She asked, amused, doing her best to act like she hadn't understood. Yes, he blinked. In one of the first we learn, there are just so many kinds of Elvish that it's difficult to communicate amongst the courts without it. NArration quickly changed the subject. How are mages treated by humans? Dr. Ezra tapped her pen against the paper, ignoring how he flinched at her movement. Well, mostly positively. It's really rare to have mages of any significant magical talent. So for most people who can use magic, it's a party trick. Something interesting but not life-changing. Each country has their own society of mages that deals with apprenticeships and all that. But most people who want to study magic go to university route. Is there no difference between a highborn and lowborn mages? He smiled. In most places we don't have a higher or lowborn at all. Sure, some people might claim noble titles, and money always helps, but we try not to judge people on their birth. NArration gave a slow nod. You mentioned elections. Can one of your low-born people be chosen to ruler? His voice was soft and hesitant. Yes, the current Secretary General. She's like the leader of all humans was the daughter of a servant. He was quiet as he mused that over. Are you, a low-born? Asked Dr. Ezra. I am, he admitted. If it weren't for my magical talent, I would have never been brought along. And his birth was likely the reason that he'd been left behind. She leaned forward again, and he cringed back all the same. NArration, why are you so scared of humans? He stared at her, and the diplomat began to make protesting sounds again. NArration continued to stare at her for several more seconds before he responded. Why? Repeated NArration. Why am I scared? He took a deep breath and let it out. I am scared because I was told to fear your people since my birth. I am scared because I saw my mother killed by humans who used nothing more than rocks. For the first time, he raised his voice. I am scared because you defeated us when your people had an infant's grasp on magic and lived in mud huts. And now you humans have 900 years of additional time and knowledge beyond our comprehension. That is why I'm scared. And he didn't say anything more. It took a month for humanity to decide. It would have taken longer, but Lord Arinless had given them a hard deadline. Bluntly, he told them that not to bother with responding past that time. By then, the Winter Court would be dead. The elves had synchronized the time of both realms so that travel would be possible. Unfortunately, that meant that a month was actually a month in both dimensions. And so, Cole had to break some studying from his exams to operate the rune singer. He typed in a message again, and at the designated time sent it. A group of 100 volunteers consisting of League peacekeepers and soldiers from a dozen countries would go through the portals. They were to use their judgment in deciding how much and what kind of support would be given, and they would assist for exactly 1 month before reporting back. Humanity would help. Kunya shuddered. It felt like the air itself was drawing in magic, filling his lungs and making his skin prickle. The Elvish realm. He felt more magic than ever before. Enough to make him dizzy. He'd checked at readings. There was double the ambient here compared to Earth. Not that the others would notice. Kunya was one of the 2 mages who volunteered. He was also the only archmage, a fact that the other soldiers teased him mercilessly about. Even now, as they passed spiraling ice towers, as they traveled through to the heart of the Winter Realm, they couldn't help but comment. Gonna turn us into a frog, Master Wizardo? Teased Sergeant Maria Tristan. Or maybe you can bring a fire or something. Warm up the place. Kunya simply sighed. I'll have the frog turning for the enemy. Keep your kinks to yourself, Sergeant, called one of them from the back. You seem way too keen about the transformation voodoo. Nah, don't you know, Maria here is most interested in hot elves. That's why she volunteered. Lynn, a soldier from the North American military like Maria, grinned. I used to share the barracks with her. She had more copies of 50 Shades of Elves than the law should allow. Laughter echoed off the ice walls and Kunya chuckled with them. They all stopped with their commanding officer threatened to make them eat snow. Of course, but it had been fun while it lasted. The 3 owls leading the contingent hadn't reacted at all, but Kunya nearly jumped out of his skin when NArration coughed to get his attention. The elf was so quiet that Kunya had forgotten all about him. "Excuse me," said Neterin in a voice low. "What is this about 50 elven shades?" He glanced at Emeria and frowned. Kunya felt an intense wave of second and first-hand embarrassment. "It's a romance novel," he explained, resisting the urge to facepalm. "It's a part of a famous series of, love stories. More like erotica. Between humans and elves." "What?" he said, his eyes widening. "Is it allowed? Is it common? How many people read those?" Kunya shrugged and turned to Sergeant question. "Tristan, how popular are those books?" It's sold about 100 million copies." She ducked under the low-hanging icicle, her boots crunching in the snow. "More people saw the movies, I think." "Look at her, all stats memorized too," snickered Lynn. Neterin mumbled something in Elven, slowly shaking his head. "How many humans live on Earth?" 8 billion, give or take a couple million. "Billion?" Neterin looked ready to faint. "Well, how many elves are there?" asked Kunya. Neterin didn't answer. "Wait up a sec," said the head peacekeeper, catching up to the elves in the front. As a veteran of 30 years, Adam Lorenzo had been in his fair share of conflict. Lord Arenalus had given them information about the opposing side before they'd entered the strange-ass dimension. In this situation, he's reminding him of this time in East Russia during the Civil War. Half the ladies' armies was being coerced either by magic or old-fashioned threats. The opposing side also relied heavily on their leader's direction. "You said that the lady was heading towards the capital a few days ago, right?" he said once he'd gotten their attention, "and that she'd probably reached them at the same time as us." "That is correct," Lord Arenalus said, frowning. Adam grinned. "Say, you don't happen to know all the entrances into the city, do you?" They reached the capital city of the Winter Court and found that it was under siege as expected. A so-called Lady of the Lake hovered above the army of 5,000, lazily casting bolts of lightning and enormous ice walls. The magic wards enveloping the city were beginning to flicker under the bombardment of countless spells. "Hal, we came at the real right time, huh?" muttered the soldier. Slowly the lady turned, facing the small contingent of 54. Her deep blue skin shimmered in the light, white markings covering her arms and face. Unlike the other elves they'd seen, she had a bright red hair that shone like a fire. "Lord Arenalus," she said loudly, her voice projected across the entire battlefield. "How low have you fallen, bringing them into our realm? Have you forgotten what they've done?" "You have done worse." Lord Arenalus raised his staff, gathering the light of a blue orb at the tip. "I do this because I must." The lady laughed. "And you, humans, you have so little honor that you're willing to help them. What has he promised you? Wealth, power, the return of your realm's manor?" Kunya's mind whirled at a comment. It took an enormous amount of magic to open the door to another dimension, but 5 elves had opened it twice in 1 month with no difficulty. More than that, the elves threw around mana with no concern for conservation. The air here was thick with magic, in contrast to Earth, where fewer mages were born each year, and the environmental mana had been declining since recorded memory. Maybe it wasn't just a human overuse. Maybe it was more than, "And so you shall die." With a wave of her hand, she commanded the troops forward. "Finish them quickly." He'd apparently turned out a pre-battle monologuing. His thoughts could wait. With a deep breath, he activated the wards, pumping as much magic as he could through the amplifier that he carried. The result was a shield 5 times more powerful than anything he made on Earth. Magic was so much easier to do here. The army of 5,000 crashed against the invisible wall, pushing against it with an uncoordinated grace. Alongside the physical assault, about half the army was bombarding the shield with spells. Kunya gritted his teeth. Despite his fellow mage's help, the amplifier, and the extra magic, he wouldn't be able to keep it up for much longer. The amplifier was barely military grade. No one wanted to give cutting-edge technology that could end up in the hands of a dubious allies or a genocidal elves. "When's the signal?" murmured one of the soldiers. They had their guns at the ready, but didn't fire. The Lady of the Lake finally turned her head away from the city to gaze at the small group of humans and elves that resisted the full force of her army. She raised her arm, gathering a huge burst of magic that would undoubtedly crush the head's shield, and was promptly shot in the head. The other half of the peacekeeping force had made it to the top of the city walls. "There it is!" shouted Sergeant Tristan. The 50 humans began shooting. The opposing army was pinched between two tiny human forces. The Lady of the Lake looked dazed, her personal shield visibly cracking. Before she could recover, a hail of bullets laced the anti-magic coatings, broke her shield completely. Her body shuddered and jerked, and like a stone, it fell. The effect was instantaneous. The lady's army stalled. Then half the soldiers turned, and half of the army tore itself apart. The Secretary General clinked her glass of wine against Lord Arenalis's cup. Elven enjoyed their drink too, and a victory wine tasted the sweetest. "Here's to continued success and peaceful relations between our people," said Meenakshi. Lord Arenalis raised his glass in response and echoed her toast. "And thank you for assisting us in our time of need, despite the past events in our history." "As humans forget quite easily," she said, smiling, "we have short cultural memories." "In that case, it has been a blessing." Meenakshi mused over the world-shaking events of the past 2 months. She'd been stunned upon hearing that the little peacekeeping force, one that had been sent to mainly observe, had defeated the great lady of the lake so handily and with no casualties. Meenakshi wasn't complaining, though. She was glad that the problem had been solved. But there was still another pressing issue. "What now?" she asked, leaning back. The Lord raised a delicate eyebrow. "You're asking me?" Unsaid was the implication that his own opinion didn't matter. The human civilization now knew the power differential between both species. Meenakshi admired the elf's handsome, although still strange face, and took another sip. "Of course, you're the ones who contacted us. Do you still want to open diplomatic relations?" "We would." He merely swirled the wine in his cup, a look of wry amusement creeping over his face. "Wonderful. I'm sure both of our people can gain from this exchange." The elves were more than the humans, except in one aspect. She set her glass down and smiled. "Which reminds me, I heard from one of the mages that the Elven realm was siphoning off all of our mana. Is that true?" "Yes," said the Lord, not even bothering to deny the half-truths. "But I'm sure that we could change that, though it might take some time. Do you find that acceptable?" "I'm positively over the moon," she replied, her tone drier than a Sahara desert. He stared. "You did what?" "Right." She'd forgotten that he was using a translation spell. The effect was seamless, though it wasn't good enough to translate idioms. "It's an expression," explained the Secretary General. "It means that I'm overjoyed." Lord Arenalis relaxed. "I see. For a moment there I had assumed that you had accomplished yet another possibility." "Not me personally, though we have had people land on the moon before." She smiled at his stunned expression. Their shock at mundane facts of humanity would never stop being entertaining. The elf began to laugh, long and hard enough that tears were gathering at the corner of his eyes. "Humans!" he gasped as his laughter faded. "Even after 300 years, you never ceased to surprise me." He looked at him with a mix of amusement and pride. "I hope we will continue to surprise you in the years to come." The elf chuckled, and then the sound of defeated and sardonic, and yet strangely hopeful. "I do not doubt it for a second." End of story. I hope that you enjoyed, and if you did, please consider subscribing. If you wish to support the author, there is a link to the original story, so pop over there and give him your support. If you wish to support this channel, however, there are a few ways to do so. The best and easiest would be to share this video with other people, as well as liking, subscribing, and leaving a comment. All of these things tell the algorithm that this channel is at least vaguely interesting, and that may share it with other people. If you wish to support the channel in some other manner, watching my other videos would also help tremendously. Or, if you really like, there is a link down below to leave a tip or to join the Patreon. Any and all support is very much appreciated. And I hope that you all have a good one until the next time, and I'll see you then. Cheers.